everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for another sort of useful webinar from Transforming Autism Project. My name is Aaliya Mavini. I am an occupational therapist, and I'll just be sharing some background and strategies to engaging your autistic child or autistic child that you may be caring for in play and everyday activities. So just a little background about myself. I work as a highly specialist children's occupational therapist in the NHS, and I also work for Transforming Autism Project for on weekends and in my spare time. I cover 2 specialist schools in my NHS job, predominantly with autistic children, and I also cover sort of really complex under 6 children with cerebral palsy, rare genetic conditions, etc. So I really hope that I'm able to sort of share some strategies and make it really useful for you all. Okay, so just moving on, we'll just have some housekeeping to make sure that the session goes nice and smoothly. Can I just ask that everyone just switches off their camera, please, and keep the microphones on mute during the presentation. It just helps with the connectivity. And also feel free to ask any questions in the chat or save them at the end. You have an opportunity to switch on your camera and switch on your microphones to ask them, and we'll try and make it as interactive as possible. I really feel that I learn a lot from others, so feel free to share your thoughts, questions and examples, but please just be mindful of confidentiality if you're mentioning any names or places or things like that. So just those things out of the way there. Right, so today, just a bit of an overview of what we'll be discussing today. We'll start off with a brief overview of what play is and what stages of play are. These are the sort of typical things that you might find online and from other resources, but I think it's really important to have a little bit of a background. And then you'll have a bit of a caveat from me and a takeaway message. And then after that, we'll discuss. I'll provide you with some insight on everyday activities for children of the age range of 0 to 4 years. And then after that, I'll share how personally, as an occupational therapist, what my thought process is when I'm looking at engagement with, engaging children in play, and really trying to give you that insight and that lens to sort of look at, so you can have that perspective to be able to help your child or children you may be caring for. And then we'll look at some strategies, how to support engagement. And then finally, but very importantly, we'll go through your thoughts and questions, and we'll try and make this as interactive as possible. Okay, so when we talk about play really is the main occupation or the focus for young children. This is their work. This is what they do. And this is how they are wired to develop. Play in autistic children can be very different and unique to other children around them. And I'd like to give you some background on the different types of play. Now, if you look these up on the internet, perhaps they'll be termed as stages of play. However, this is not how I prefer to refer to it. I like, especially when it comes to autistic children, and I'm sure you'll agree with me when we explore these deeper. So we'll start off with sensory motor play, and this is really play activities that children engage in using their senses. So they'll probably use their mouths, they'll lick, they'll mouth things, to try and explore, to understand what that object is. They'll manipulate using their hands, so they might pick up a little toy and try and manipulate it to try and sort of explore and see what it is, what the properties are, what could it do for them. Also feeling, touching, and all of those kind of things as well. Moving on, the other kind of play that you might observe is organizing play. And this is really the kind of cause and effect where children start to match things. It might be colors, it might be shapes. They start to sort things and fit things into, another thing. Like they'll start filling up containers or pouring things and just understanding how much water can this jug hold, for example. So it's really trying to sort of enhance that play and add more to it. You'll also see that children have functional play, and this is when children employ some understanding of the purpose of objects. So, for example, they will recognize that this train has wheels, and I can sort of roll it back and forth and move it around, or they'll pick up a spoon and they'll try to maybe scoop something because now they've understood the purpose of that spoon and what it does for them. Moving on, you'll also find there's pretend play. And this is sort of a higher level of play where there is more executive functions that a child uses, such as imitation, memory, remembering things, a little bit of that judgment as well, timing, and also mixing it all together with their own imagination to create play activity that is unique to them. So this is the sort of different types of play. And like I said, they are referred to as stages of play, from sort of infancy to later on in the childhood. But for autistic children, I really like to see these as types of play, and it's not so sequential. It doesn't move from sensory motor to organizing to functional and then pretend. You might actually find that there is sort of so much of that going back and forth, or it might be that the children would prefer one play over another because of their uniqueness. So play has a huge social component, and it really aids our social development, social emotional development as well. And it needs to be explored in its own right. So you'll also find things that on the internet and other resources, that there are different types of social play. And I'll just kind of go through these because I think they are quite important. Our autistic children do sort of have difficulties in their sort of social emotional aspects, and I think it will really help with that. Sensory motor play is when children are engrossed in play by themselves and don't really notice what's going on around them. So you see them absolutely happily engaged in their own play, and it might be that they will be, as discussed previously, sort of in that functional stage or that pretend play stage, but they're sort of playing by themselves. The next sort of type of social play is spectator play, and that is when they're really looking for attention, or they're looking for affirmations from familiar adults around them. They may start to imitate and borrow ideas from others, sort of looking and then sort of enhancing their own play. Parallel play is when sort of a group of children are engaged in the same activity, perhaps like, for example, at the same station, but each kind of doing their own thing. It kind of reminds me of an open air office, for example. Everyone's got their own little space, they're all doing their own little thing, not necessarily engaging with the others, but just aware that everyone's around them. And then finally, there's another kind of play. There's associative play, and this is when children will be together. They'll be borrowing ideas from each other, perhaps having a chat while they're sort of engaged as well, but sort of creating their own little masterpieces as they're doing it. So not sort of engaging actively with one another, but sort of engaging in a more passive way, for being around them, having a chat and having that increased awareness of the people around them and who is at their station, perhaps. And then there's also cooperative play, and this is when children will actively play with other children or peers following their rules, or perhaps giving out rules and regulations and being the bossy ones. They will be taking turns. There'll be that back and forth communication to create a joined masterpiece. So something that they will collectively be playing together or creating together. So those are the things that you will find typically from other resources in terms of what play is and what types of play that children experience. So I am a mum of 3 children, and I cannot tell you how much this quote, which says, even for parents of children that are not on the spectrum, there is no such thing as a normal child. I cannot tell you how much this quote rings true. What I do want you to take away from today are a couple of messages. And one of them is that all children are unique. Full stop. The information on what to expect from ages and stages or milestones to achieve is only just a guideline. And for autistic children who are unique in their ability, not disability, they may demonstrate a certain type of play, and that is so beautiful because they are deeply specializing their ability, their development in that aspect, that perhaps other children who have skimmed past that type of play or social play, they will never be able to achieve that level of depth. And it's just really important to recognize that as parents or carers of children with autism or autistic children. But obviously, as parents, we would want our children to engage in all different kinds of play so that they may be able to adapt to different environments or different settings that they are expected to be in. And so therefore, we will look at how we can gently promote that engagement a little bit more widely and really broaden their scope of engagement. So the main takeaway message, before I talk about sort of everyday activities, which is really where my expertise lie, is really to sort of, if there's one thing that you take away from this session today, is to really celebrate the strength of autistic children and their uniqueness rather than their differences. Because autism is not a disability, it's just a different ability. And it will take professionals, it will take parents, it will take children with autism, autistic children, to actually promote this message and change the environment so that it adapts to them and not them adapting to the environment. So it's just really important. And I think you'll see that this is such a poignant thing in this session, and how we can actually promote engagement in different aspects. So when we look at everyday activities, and like I said, that is my forte as an occupational therapist, what we really mean is sort of those basic daily activities that we engage in. Most of us are fortunate to be able to sort of do every day as part of our automated daily routine. We don't really have to think about it. We'll roll out of bed, we'll go brush our teeth or have breakfast, and things that we don't really have to think about it. It's become part of our daily routine, our second nature, and we just kind of do it. But for autistic children, some of these activities may be completely novel. They will be meaningless, and a lot of the times they're effortful. And this is where they really need that support, that understanding from us, so that they can engage and form some sort of a routine which will give meaning and context to their days. How daily activities develop: typically, children will start to show purposeful interest and engage in everyday activities around 9 to 12 months. They usually start with feeding, so you see them, taking more interest in food, and then, they'll be looking at sort of maybe dressing. They'll take a hat, they'll put it on. So it's a little bit of that functional play where they understand the purpose of the hat, but they're also sort of, doing that dressing task. They may push their arms through sleeves, things like that. They may pick up a hairbrush and start to sort of brush their hair, or try to sort of assist with a little bit of that grooming in terms of like teeth brushing, things like that. Engage in mark making or tidying up and things like that as well. So engagement in everyday activities in a meaningful context is just as important as play for autistic children. And I cannot stress this more as an occupational therapist. It is just so important that we are engaging children in everyday activities and promoting their independence as much as possible. So again, if you look up some of these resources on the internet, you will find that there are dressing milestones, and they're beautifully sort of classed in terms of, at what age children do certain things. But again, I like to sort of refer to them as sort of easiest to the hardest based on our own bodies and what our bodies are able to do, and our sort of physical development. But again, it's not set in stone. Children will not necessarily, remove their socks before they do certain things. It's just sort of, it gives us a bit of a guideline as to, what to kind of expect and what our physical body is capable of doing at certain stages. However, there are lots of other challenges that children, with autistic children will have, like sensory challenges, for example, and therefore, the fabric, the fabric for, the socks fabric may not be something they'll be able to tolerate. So, removing socks might be something that they achieve much quickly or much later than other children. So it's really trying to keep those things in mind. But in terms of sort of the level of ability, of our physical ability, removing socks is what we see from children, putting on a hat, for example, and taking off their hats, pushing arms and legs through openings when they're getting dressed, putting on wellies and slippers, and then moving on to sort of pulling up their bottoms and pulling down t-shirt from their head, for example, putting on their coats and pulling up a zip, but not quite being able to engage the zip, so not being able to put the two together, and they'll need adult support for that. Putting on shoes and socks, which does really require a lot of core strength for them to be able to do that. And then the really fine motor bits like fastening, like buttons, where you really have to have that pincer grip to pinch and pull and kind of engage in that little slot when you're engaging the zip, or shoelaces, which does require a little bit of that motor planning as to how am I going to do, how am I going to tie the knot and how am I going to hold it in place so that my fingers aren't in the way and things like that as well. So it's really kind of in terms of the ease of difficulty of what our bodies are able to do. So let me share a sort of a therapist's perspective, or how would I look at promoting strategies to engage in play and everyday activities. So as an occupational therapist, I will always look at the person, environment, and the occupation. So you look at the child and you see what their ability is. So always start with their ability, always start with their strength, because it is really the point to start. And maybe perhaps forget about their disability and just look at what they're able to do, because it will give you the clues of how to progress them on to the next stage. Have a look at the environment and see how is the environment able to support that child's play or engagement, or how it is able to impede it as well. So have a really good look at that as well, and break that down into those kind of components, because it really helps us to focus on areas that we can control. And then finally look at the occupation. So by occupation, I mean the activity, where play or a daily activity, what is it that they are being asked to do? Is it actually reasonable? Are they able to do it? What could be some of the things that they're not able to do? Are they able to grasp? Are they able to tolerate the sensations and things like that? I'm just going to switch on my charger. I believe I've switched it off. Okay, sorry about that. Right. Okay, so moving on. So how do we promote engagement? As explained before, start with your child, observe their interests. And, with autistic children, sometimes it's so obvious what their interests are. Sometimes it's not, and it requires a lot more observation in different settings, perhaps at home, at a friend's house, or in a park, just to see what is it that they're interested in, and have a really close look at what sort of play are they demonstrating. Is it very sensory motor? Is it just using their senses? Are they starting to understand the function of things? What is their sort of social play like? Are they sort of playing alongside other children, or do they prefer to play by themselves? Do you think they will be able to take turns, and how they will be able to sort of do that? So it's really observing and even perhaps making a note of these things, because they'll be really important to share with other sort of therapists or other professionals that you may come across, to be able to support them. The second thing is to really gain their attention. And these are sort of communication strategies that you can use. I quite like to use ready, steady, and then whatever I'm doing. So if I'm asking a child to push something, I'll be like, ready, steady, push. It just allows their body and gives them some time to be able to engage and get their attention, get them ready for what we're trying to ask them to engage in. Look at some other communication strategies that you may already be using or have been advised to use. There might be visuals that the child may be able to engage in. There is now and next boards as well that some children find quite useful. So have a look at sort of strategies of how we can sort of gain their attention. Just simply being able to sort of address them by a name. If there is a child who has, under-responsive auditory system where they really need that extra bit to try and gain their attention by sort of tapping them on the shoulder or calling out their name a couple of times for them to sort of, pay attention to what is being asked, or pay attention to the person asking them to do something. Introduce and enrich back and forth engagement, and the psychotherapists who work for TAP are absolutely brilliant in sort of promoting that in their sessions and advising about that, and really look at that back and forth. What can you do to try and engage them so that there is that back and forth? And for example, if you're singing a rhyme or a song, when does it start? When does it stop? Can we introduce a start and a stop in there, so that there is all of that back and forth, that anticipation, that waiting a little bit for them to give you something to be like excited about. Emphasize your expressions when you're talking to them. If they are able to sort of tolerate that sort of facial, that eye contact, and all of that, wait for them to ask for more. So we're actually trying to get more from them and getting them to sort of engage with us. A big thing with a lot of autistic children is sensory processing, and I believe it might be covered in these series of webinars. So do have a look on the TAP website of when that will be. Managing sensory stimuli and sensory sensations and their sensitivities and the behaviors that they present with after certain sensations, by co-regulating with them or allowing them to carry out those sensory strategies, or supporting them to do those strategies, and to then promote self-regulation. So it's all about sometimes co-regulating with them. Perhaps it might be that sitting down with them in a quiet room so that they can be away from the noise, so they can engage in the play or the daily activity that they're engaged in. Sometimes, for example, I will take children, even though their coats are in the hallway, in the school hallways, I will actually take them to a quiet space so that they can actually engage the zip before I bring them back into this. Thinking about really how are we going to manage the sensory elements of the environment, and looking at that co-regulation or supporting their self-regulation. Consistency and predictability. This is huge. Autistic children need to feel in control of themselves and their surroundings and their environment. And having that consistency and that expectation and that knowing what's coming next is just key to their functioning, and it's just so important. So it's really establishing more consistency and predictability as and when possible, and giving them a lot more notice and preparing them as much as possible. And going back to my first point, observing your child's interest, really taking their lead and adding a very small element of change to progress their play. So it's a very, very gradual process. And as a therapist, I will say that, autistic children don't just benefit from weekly sessions. In fact, they benefit from those daily, meaningful contexts with familiar adults like parents, teachers, educators, learning support assistants, in supporting their play and engagement far more than they will during therapy sessions with a therapist that they might be seeing every week. So it's just really, really important that the adults who care for autistic children are in tune with in being able to promote these and feel empowered and feel that they are the ones who are actually making that therapeutic change. And it's just so important that that realization and awareness is there as well. Okay, so just generally looking back at our person, occupation, and environment model, we can look at some other strategies and more specific strategies to promote engagement. So if you look at the environment, perhaps you think about the sensory strategies, like I said, can we dampen down the sensation? So, can we go to a quieter room, or perhaps are there some ear defenders or headphones or ear muffs that the child can use to dampen down the sensations that they're not able to control from the environment? So it's really looking at the environment and how that promotes or impedes engagement. Use visuals. And I particularly love some of these dressing visuals from, I believe it's the OT therapy source. It's on the, I can't see it on my screen because the image is very small, but the reference is there. And they have some of these beautiful visuals, which are very simple for a child to be able to use. And especially with children with communication difficulties, then they're then able to use some of these visuals. Have a look at the activity. So what are we asking them to do, or what are they engaged in doing? The play activity or the daily engagement activity. Think about the meaningful context. Practicing putting on shoes when you're going out is way more meaningful for an autistic child than to actually do it outside of the context when we're just practicing. And this is where it's really key that it's not just the therapists who can promote these things, it is the adults who are with the children and who are supporting the children. So that can be at school, it can be parents at home, it can be grandparents if they're visiting them. So try and do things in a meaningful context, practicing using cutlery at snack times and lunch times and dinner times rather than doing it outside of play, or introducing it in perhaps, pretend play and things like that as well. So really think about a meaningful context of where and how to promote that particular play activity or a daily activity. And then there's something that as occupational therapists we really promote, and it's called backward or forward chaining. So it's really starting where your child is at, and then you either work back or you work forward. So for example, with dressing, if the only thing they're able to do is push their arms through, then you would do forward chaining and you would ask the child to push their arms through, or you would support them to do that, and then the therapist then takes over and does the steps forward to complete that activity. Or it could be backward chaining. So it might be that the child is able to just pull up the zip on their coat. So what the adult then does is they will do all the other steps before pulling up the zip. So they will support, they will physically assist the child to put on their coat, they will engage the zip, and they will sort of get it ready. So then the only thing that the child will be doing is pulling up. And then what you're doing is you're gradually then sort of working back or working forward, depending on what you're doing, and getting the child to do more and the adult to do less. And then finally, look at the person. Hand over hand strategy is so important, and I promote this a lot because it really is the body's language to understand what is being requested, to understand what movement is required for that particular activity, to understand how much pressure is expected for them to actually, be using to engage that zip or to hold that cutlery. So when you use your own hands over the child's hands, if they're able to tolerate it, it's like it's a different language for them altogether. And if they have communication needs, or they also have other sort of difficulties like global developmental delay and things like that, then it's really, really key that they will understand what you're trying to ask them to do. It's very important to note and remember that for autistic children, there is very poor transfer of skills. Perhaps you and I have been able to undo and do a large button. And when it comes to doing like a smaller shirt button, we will kind of be able to transfer our skills from when we sort of did and undid that large button and be able to do that smaller button by just kind of, gripping a little bit harder, by using the tips of our fingers. So we're actually doing that really kind of fine pincer grip and holding the button closely, or looking down and just trying to see. And for autistic children, that sort of they may be able to, do and undo a large button on a template or a snake ribbon that you may practice on. But when it comes to their own clothing and the button size has changed or something about it has changed, they may actually find it quite difficult to transfer that skill. And it's just about sort of repeating those steps and things that they might know, and just kind of redoing that activity a little bit and reteaching them as well. And finally, repetition, repetition, repetition. I cannot say how many times I have actually, during therapy sessions, we've done the same set of jigsaw puzzle, but every time the child has demonstrated they've learned something new. And it's just so important that you repeat, repeat, repeat in a very consistent way. And like I said, earlier, to add an element of a little bit of a challenge or change a little bit of a variable to just progress them onto a different stage. Right, so I think that's about it from me. Hopefully we'll have lots of time left for questions. I don't think there's anything come through the chat, but feel free to, share your thoughts, ideas, agree with me, disagree with me. Yeah, so it's really over to you guys now. Hopefully silence means that it's all positive and it's all great. Yeah. But if you have any questions, just feel free to ask away. Thank you, Angel. Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much. And there are some other webinars that TAP Transforming Autism Project have done previously that I would really, really highly recommend. that you try and watch. One of them is Missing Milestones, and that's a little interview with a therapist that Guy Shahar, the founder of TAP, has done, and it's absolutely beautiful. So I would really encourage you all to watch that. So yes, have a little browse through our webinars, our other webinars as well. I see that there's a question on there, so I'm just going to read that out. Okay, so somebody's asking, a child repeats a single phrase for everything. What does that mean? It clearly means that they're trying to obviously gain attention. It's something that they feel they know, and perhaps it is something that adults have responded to previously, and therefore they're using that again and again because they know that they have used it before. It's trial and error. It's been successful, and then that's what they're doing. I'm not a speech and language therapist, so I can't sort of explain why they might be doing it or how they could be progressed in terms of their communication need, but it's certainly something that you might want to discuss with a local speech and language therapists. I know I don't think we've got any speech and language therapists at TAP, but I know with the local NHS service that there might be your local speech and language therapist, or there might be something called the advice line where you can call and ask these questions and perhaps be able to get some answers. But when somebody sort of says that to me, that the child repeats a single phrase for everything, what does that? It feels that they're obviously trying to gain attention. It's obviously they're making every effort to try and communicate, and it might be something that they've found successful in the past and therefore they're using it. Or it could just be that the repertoire of their vocabulary is poor, and if they might need to sort of increase that. And that might be something that a speech and language therapist might be able to advise you a little bit more on.
Aaliya, it's Neil. Zara has her hand raised.
Yes.
Zara, if you'd like to come off mute and ask your question.
Oh, hi. Sorry, I can't see the chat box for some reason. I'm using my phone. What I wanted to ask is, my son, he has an autism diagnosis and he plays with balls at the moment. He's just very fascinated with the balls and he'll keep bouncing the balls. He kicks it sometimes and he throws it, but he doesn't really interact with others. And we're trying to teach him to interact with us with the ball, but we just don't know how to get him to interact with us and learn that play skill.
Interesting. It's lovely that he's actually engaging with balls, because obviously that is a step forward for his gross motor skills. So well done, and well done for giving him the opportunities for him to continue to engage in that. So if he's just throwing and kicking, I would imagine that he's at that sort of functional play stage where he's obviously understanding what a ball does, and it bounces, and he likes that cause and effect as well, and all of that. If he's able to tolerate sort of a lot of eye contact and that face on contact with yourselves or with others, trying to get him to sort of throw to you and making those sort of expressions, really emphasizing them, applauding him, praising him, and just really affirming where he's at and what he's doing, can be quite successful. But if he's not quite tolerating that, then maybe another way to progress that play, so he's not just kind of aimlessly throwing, obviously he's learning from that, but you may want to progress a little bit more, is to maybe go behind him and maybe using the hand over hand approach and getting him to aim into a laundry basket, for example. So now we're sort of progressing him a little bit. He's still playing, but the other thing that's also important to remember is that you can you know, go at your child's pace as well. So if you feel that they're not quite ready for it, try it another day. You know, or if he's had one or two goes, you know, with an adult behind and aiming into something, a hoop, for example. A hoop might be a bit difficult depending on the age of your child, but you know, a laundry basket or a big area which is visually marked nicely. So then you go, oh wow, you got it inside the red circle. Well done. You know, lots of kind of simple language, expressive language, trying to sort of progress. So maybe, you know, you're progressing his throwing and catching to now aiming at a certain thing. So when he does kind of come to like throw and catch with somebody else, he's now able to aim at that person and, you know, kind of have that kind of play. So we're really trying to sort of introduce a small element at their own pace, using some strategies like positioning, what you're doing, our own sort of, you know, body to make them understand what we're trying to ask them to do, but just progressing their play as well and adding a little bit of a fun element to it as well.
Oh, fabulous!
I hope
Thank
that
you
was
very much.
useful. Yeah.
So, what was the name of the book? Who's the author of the book you mentioned? Missing Milestones.
It's not actually a book. It is one of the webinars that
Okay.
Guy Shahar, who is the founder of Transforming Autism Project, so the founder of TAP, has
Okay.
interviewed another therapist, and I just think it's just so useful because it's, you know, it's so lovely to see other therapists kind of who have a real insight in working with autistic children and talking about, you know, what really milestones mean for autistic children. So I'd really recommend, and there's some other beautiful webinars. There's one by a parent. I can't remember at the top of my head what the topic is, but she's talking about her child and when she started to notice those strengths and those and celebrating them, and how, you know, it made a huge difference to what she was seeing and how she was being able to promote and help them develop. So have a little browse through our webinar section on our website. Perhaps if Neil, if you've got it handy, that website link, if you can add it to the chat. If not, I will do that.
No problem, Aaliya. You have a couple of questions in the chat now.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah. No worries. Thank you, Zara. Can you send us the presentation slides? Yes, absolutely. I will put that in a PDF format, and I think we've got your email addresses, and we can share them out and we can send that out through TAP. No problem at all. Jasmine is asking, do you have recommendations for places online where you can get visuals such as getting dressed visual? Google Images is my best friend. I normally put down dressing visuals and you will find them there. There might be a lot of the NHS sites have a separate children's occupational therapy resource section. You might find some in there, but to be honest, I think in the NHS we're just so busy that we've not had time to develop these visuals. On the other hand, we promote the stuff that a lot of mum bloggers, a lot of other sort of private therapists that may have developed, and they may be online. So have a little look at Google Images, and normally I just put down visuals for activities or dressing or specific activities that you're looking at, for example, dressing. It might be also associated with social stories, so have a look at social stories as well. Things like toileting might be on there as well. Social stories around going to the toilet and all of that. So you'll find a lot of visuals there and see what works for your child. It might be that, you know, colourful visuals are quite distracting, and you might want to, you know, opt for a black and white one, one with words, one without words. So have a look and see what works for your child. Use them in places where they can actually see them, not behind, you know, a closed door, for example, because it just kind of defeats the purpose. It's too hard and effortful for them to access and for them to see. So have a think about where you position them and using them consistently as well. So in the specialist schools that I work in, they have broken them down into like little sequences just above the coat peg, for example, on how to put on their coats, and that's just very effective. Children don't necessarily need an adult to sort of move them on to the next stage. They can sort of look at the visual and do that more independently. Yeah, so internet is where I kind of find my visuals as well. What is chaining? Okay, good question. So I did kind of touch on that a little bit. I'll just elaborate a little bit more. So chaining is either is what I'm hoping you're referring to. Feel free to tell me if it's not. It's backward chaining or forward chaining. So backward chaining is something that the child is able to kind of do the last stage of an activity, for example. And what we would do is we would get them to do that last stage that they're able to do, for example, pulling up the zip when they're putting on their coat. And then the adult does all the other stages leading up to that last stage. So for example, they will help them they'll get their coats from the peg, they'll position it, close to the shoulders, level there, help them push their arms through, they will engage the zip, and then, bring it up a little bit and hold the fabric in place so then the child is able to zip up and do that last stage. And then you kind of work backwards. So perhaps, if they're able to pull up the zip, you would kind of work backwards, and the next stage is for them to engage the zip. And sort of using that hand over hand support, you train them to engage the zip, and they're able to do that. So then they have added to their repertoire of skills when they're putting their coats on. So now they can pull the zip up, they can engage the zip, and then you kind of work backwards so that the child does more and the adult supports less. And that's what backward chaining is. Forward chaining, on the other hand, is the child is able to do the first step of the activity or the task, and the parent or the carer or the therapist does the sort of later stages. So for example, they're able to push their arms through and you let them do that, and then the adult does kind of holding the zip, engaging and pulling up the zip, and then you gradually get them to once they've pushed their arms through, maybe get them to engage the zip, and then so they're now able to push their arms through, engage the zip, and the adult is only pulling up that last stage. So it's really kind of, in a way, kind of co-doing the activity with your child. So you're actually doing with them. They get a lot of that adult support, that connection, that sort of sense of comfort sometimes that they may need. It relieves their anxiety a little bit. You're doing with them. There's a little bit of that turn taking as well. So there's that back and forth in there. There's a beautiful way to progress them in their sort of daily activity and in their skill set of being able to do that activity. So I hope that was clear, but feel free to let me know if you want me to clarify that further. I'll move on to the next question. Teacher, if a child has certain interests such as numbers and princess, and it's all she wants to watch or talk about, how to go about in introducing other things she might like? Okay, very good question. So this is very common in autistic children. It is one of the characteristics that they will engage and repeatedly engage in the same activity in the same way. But obviously, as parents, until the environment changes for them, we need to sort of equip them with skills for them to be able to engage in other things and really broaden their sort of skill set and their engagement. So it's really going back to your child. What is it that they like? They like numbers and princesses. Amazing. What sort of play are they demonstrating? Is it functional play? I would imagine there's probably functional play. Can we progress on to like pretend play, for example? If they're just using a book to look at numbers and reading about princesses, can we look at maybe 3D figures of the same characters or things that they are looking at, and bring them onto the book and see, and adding an element of play. So for example, if I worked with a child who really liked books and they really liked Peppa Pig, which was fantastic. But then what we did was, to progress them on to then their engagement, we looked at little Peppa Pig figures and all the other characters like George, etc., etc. And then we kind of put them on the books. And then you get these interactive books as well, which have sounds and these little figures that you can buy with them, or you can buy them separately. And then we started sort of a little bit of that role play, Peppa's meeting George. And then that story, we would kind of play it out with like little characters and little figures. And then we would add to their sort of language and communication. We're adding to their sort of fine motor skills. We're adding, but we're just enhancing that play. But if you note, we've started where the child was, what their interests were, because that is the key to engaging an autistic child. Start where they are at, and then add on, and how, really consider the different sort of types of play I've mentioned today, and add on a little element, and do it at their own pace. Use hand over hand support. Do it in a quiet environment if it needs to be, or in a sort of noisier environment with some white noise if you think that that will help them engage. So it's really trying to look at where they're at, that person, what is the activity, how can I add an element to it, and really controlling the environment. So it's really looking at that child, activity, and the environment. Thank you, Neil, for sharing those website links. Very useful. Amazing. Thank you, Jasmine, for the positive feedback. Oh, Catherine, thank you very much. She shared that Do to Learn have some good visuals. I'll definitely look them up as well. And do recommend photos for visuals. Yes, absolutely. So depending on where they are with their communication, and if they have a speech and language therapist, it might be that they say that photos are better to use with certain children than images or abstract images. So really have a think, and if they do have a speech language therapist who is involved, or even a child psychotherapist, then they might be able to sort of advise a little bit better on, whether you should use real photos. So for example, if they want to ask for an apple, or if there's something to do with an apple, you have a real photo of an apple. Or if you want them to do certain things like getting their coats on, then you have the photo of their coat. So then they know what you're trying to ask them to do. And some parents have actually sort of taken pictures of their own child doing the different stages of the activity and put that as a visual. And that's something to consider as well, obviously, depending on how much time and resources you have. Amazing. Thank you very, very much, Angel. Please don't call me a teacher. Absolutely not a teacher, because I'm learning from you all the time. And most importantly, I'm learning from the children that I see all the time. It's such a huge learning curve for all of us. And the more we share our ideas, the more we can enhance and support. So feel free to contact us again with any ideas that we can support you guys with, or other things that you might need, and it's certainly something that we can discuss. So Zara's asking where I'm based. So I work with Transforming Autism Project, and so that's I'm based in a sort of more local area, but at the moment I'm based in Hertfordshire. So I kind of work within the Hertfordshire NHS Trust. Okay, so any final questions or thoughts or anything at all before we close the session today? Hope I've not missed out any questions or feedback or anything. Oh, there's a question that's come through. If a child plays with the wheel of pushchair, is that play? Yeah, I mean, depending on how they're doing it, obviously I would consider safety aspects of, their little hands getting caught under, things like that. But if they're playing with the wheel of a pushchair, they're really sort of, fascinated by that, I would say perhaps let's explore the wheel, there's so much more you could do. There could be, there could be a pretend pushchair that you can get and, enhance their pretend skills. Or it could be that they're trying to understand what a round object does. Are we looking at rolling? Are they understanding that a round object is rolling and can roll on surfaces and how far it rolls, or it rolls on an incline, it goes down because of gravity, or it can't roll up unless you push it. So really start to sort of, see and maybe experiment a little bit to see where your child is at and what it is that fascinates them about this wheel. Or are they trying to screw and unscrew and the little engineer in the making, just to see, how things are put together and how the wheel is connected to the pushchair. So really try and see what is it about it that they're trying. And sometimes it takes a few sessions and observing them really closely. And as a parent, I can't tell you how hard that is to kind of sometimes put my phone down and to really give my all to just observe their play. It's a skill that does come with practice. So really sit and observe your child, or ask your partner or other family members, have you observed them doing this? What is it that you think you're doing? And share those ideas. And, it's beautiful when everyone comes together and share a little bit of it and a little bit of it. And you kind of put a piece of a puzzle together. And it's just like all of a sudden it's like a beautiful idea. And also how we could promote it, so definitely seek ideas from other people who the child may be in contact with, and observe their play just to see what it is that they're interested in. Try and also think about what other kind of play do they might like, and see if you can kind of sort of associate the two together. So if they are, if they're very hands-on and they like fixing things, and perhaps they're really trying to explore how the wheel of the pushchair is connected to the pushchair, and maybe screwing and unscrewing things might be the next step up. So really trying to get them to understand that, but also really enhance their sort of fine motor skills and develop them. So we really try to see what it is that they're doing, and sometimes it does take a little bit of time. And or if they are communicating, ask them questions, ask them like simple things. What is it that you like? Are you noticing the screw? Or just break down the language, make it really simple for them. Are they exploring the shape? Is it the color? It could just be brown or black, but for them it's still fascinating. And just take it on like that and see how see where you go from there. So Jasmine saying a big thank you for the information. My 4 and 6-year-old have been both diagnosed this year, so it is very new to me. And as a single mum, I really appreciate information that I can get, and a bonus of it is free. I'm so pleased that this was useful. Do get in touch, if you need some more information, or if there are things that we would that you would want more from us, and I'm sure we can look to see how we can sort of do more of these webinars. But again, Jasmine, don't feel that you're alone. There are lots of local services as well in the area, and reach out. A lot of NHS, a lot of private therapists have a lot of resources on the website, and if you have some time or looking for some bedtime reading, do look through some of those things. They are very useful, and it does give you some ideas as well. So yeah, don't feel that you're alone. Zara has asked a question.
Aaliya, it's Neil. I think you skipped a question there from Zara where she said, how can we support our son to use Cutlery?
Okay, Yeah, sorry, Zara. Yeah, so cutlery. Cutlery is okay. So the first question I would probably ask is how meaningful is cutlery? For a lot of autistic children, if they are ones who are seeking a lot of sensation, tactile, sensation through their hands, and this is how they understand food. So maybe for some of us, we will be for us, how food looks is very important. And, we may actually stay away from some things that don't look particularly pleasing, or may not smell nice, but taste nice. So it really, for a lot of autistic children, we find that the sense, if they are sensory seeking through their sense of touch, then they prefer to use their hands. Now, for a lot of families, this is not a problem. And within reason, they're able to use their hands for many sort of finger foods, things like that. And it's not a problem. And they've managed to work around their child's preference. But for some children, or some settings that the children might be attending, for example, schools or childminders, etc., it is a problem, and they are sort of required or recommended to use cutlery. So first is really establishing how meaningful is this. The second thing is also to establish is how much is the child coming across, coming in contact or seeing other people use cutlery. So what I'm trying to say is you are fighting an uphill battle if not many people around the child is using cutlery and they're expected to use cutlery. Hopefully that's not the case. But really is trying to see what's incorporated within their environment, and what do they see every day, because what they see every day starts to become a lot more normal to them and a lot more safer for them and a lot more, okay, I'm going to give this a try. So it's really trying to think those things through. And then it is about consistency. So if it is, for example, spoon for cereal, because they just can't eat cereal with milk using their hands. So it is about that consistency as well. So using, a spoon for breakfast every day, a spoon that they, perhaps a character that they might like. So you've got that interest and that engagement there, and hand over hand support. So depending on the age of your child, it might be something that you want to promote every day. And it might be that for, I don't know, 10 days in a row, you might need to do that hand over hand support before their body understands, well, this is what I'm supposed to be doing if they've got a communication difficulty, or if they just haven't attached meaning to using cutlery. And then it becomes almost like a habit, and it becomes part of their routine. So, really looking at cutlery that is easy to grasp. So if they are very little, so you might want to look at more chunky cutlery. There's no point in looking at cutlery that's very thin and fancy for adults. So look at the size of their hands. What is it that they can grasp? Normally, I haven't got much here with me, but normally a palmer grasp like that is a lot easier for children who are probably like 4 and under. It's a good grasp that they can hold, and then they can eat their spoon, they can use the cutlery like that. Alternatively, there are some adapted cutlery options on the website. There is caring cutlery that's kind of adapted with dents, and I find that especially for the fork and knife, because they've got little dents and they're contoured around so that the child can position their fingers appropriately, so they don't have to think about where they're placing their fingers. They've got lovely grooves on the cutlery that help them and support them with that, and then that makes it a lot easier for them. But practice. So you might want to practice meaningfully during meal times, but also away from meal times as well. So think about a snack. So for example, if they are learning to use a fork for example, instead of giving them strawberry with a fork, just a strawberry for them to use with their hands, try and get them to stab and bring it to their mouth. Sometimes when I'm giving hand over hand support, I will just gently kind of put down the other hand of the child or give them something to hold in the other hand. So now I've only got the one hand that we're now doing hand over hand support with. And I find that quite useful sometimes, because otherwise they will have both hands or one hand. Even though I'm using hand over hand support with one hand, they will use the sort of free hand to then self-feed them using their fingers. So sometimes I give them something to hold, or I'll gently kind of position myself such that, I'll kind of gently kind of put their hand under my hand, and I'm using my other hand over hand to try and promote that feeding using cutlery. So it just depends on where they're at. Again, there is a document, and I'll see if I can attach it here right now, and it's called Creating Independence During Meal Times. And it's especially for children with autism, so it's just really useful, and I'll try and do that now. Or we can send it out with the slides if I can't find it in the next minute. I don't want to keep you waiting. Yeah, I think we'll probably send it out with the slides. I will attach it and attach it with the slides, and we can send them out. But it's just a really useful document that I find that I share with parents as well. Okay, Zara's asked another question. How he can use an electric toothbrush to brush his teeth, and he can hold cutlery. So I think it's a sensory issue. I've tried many cutlery recommended by OTs. I'm wondering whether he presents with that tactile sensitivity, and it's something that he probably just doesn't like to hold. Again, I would persist with the hand over hand support, depending on their age and what they see around them as well. It does make an impact. So it's, when they start to learn from their peers and they see and imitate their peers, it becomes a really useful thing, because it's not just you saying it, it's everyone doing it in the environment, and it has a huge impact. But depending on his age, I would actually persist with the hand over hand support if it's very meaningful for yourself. For some children who might be sort of more higher functioning, you might actually want to sort of negotiate with them, and and slightly older children, and say, well, actually, can we use cutlery for this? And it's okay for you to have certain foods which are, that you can use your fingers for, things like that. So it's about sort of being a bit creative, picking your battles a little bit, but also having that consistency, that routine, that modeling from the environment. So it's something that they see from a lot of other people, for it to become a normal and meaningful thing for them. I hope I've answered your question, Zara. Okay, so we've just gone a little bit over, but thank you very, very much for joining us today. And thank you so much for the lovely feedback. And do keep in touch with us. Do let us know if there's more, such sessions that you want us to cover, and what it is. And I'm sure, we'll be looking at that. I know Guy does a lot of podcasts and YouTube clips and interviews. So there's things that he may be able to cover with other therapists and professionals. So please do keep in touch, and thank you so much for joining us, and such a big well done for doing the things that you're doing with your autistic children. So thank you very much. I hope you all have a lovely day. Thank you. Bye.